I'm relaunching Ross, one of my favorite pedal companies from the 70s, with the Ross Distortion, the Ross Phaser, the Ross Compressor, the Ross Chorus, and a never before seen or made Ross pedal, the Fuzz. The history of Bud Ross is an amazing journey, and we made an entire documentary and an essay. The links to those are below in the description, but you've probably heard of Custom Amps, which he started in 1964. It went on to be a huge amp company and peaking in 1969, 1970, but why we're here is because of Ross pedals, which came in the mid-late 70s, with the first era starting in 1977. There are now 5 distinct eras of Ross pedal history. We have the Lakewood, Colorado era. We have the Chanute, Kansas era that introduced the iconic enclosure you all know, the Taiwan era that's made up of 2 versions, the Chicago era, and the new Kansas City era that I'm playing for you today. Let's take a look at the history of the Ross Distortion first. It starts off at the Lakewood, Colorado address. This is the Era 1, and these are in Bud box enclosures. There is a script and a block logo version of these. We see on the boxes 12520 West Cedar Drive. I have the Phaser here and the Distortion. And this is where it all begins. Very cool old manual cards, warranty cards. But this needs to change because MXR is coming down pretty heavily due to trade dress and different things on companies like DoD and Ross for using the same enclosure that they had made popular in 1974, which is essentially an off-the-shelf enclosure called a Bud box. You buy these, open it up, and that's the enclosure. So Bud Ross had to stop making these, and he moves on to what we know now as Era 2. Era 2 starts in mid-78 when Bud leaves Colorado and moves back to Chanute, where he had built his dynasty of custom amplification. They move into a 210 West Main Street building and start building these pedals as you've seen them. We've all seen this enclosure. The very first version of this, there are 2 Era 2 versions, and they're just aesthetic. This says output on the very first model made, and the second model made says level. So if you're a pedal nerd, you're gonna wanna collect both of these. This is an Era 2 catalog dealer sheet, and you see the full line at the time. There were also larger pedals made that I'm not focusing on in this relaunch and necessarily this history for now, maybe later. Here's a very, very rare postcard advertisement for the pedals on an actual Ross pedal board. Somewhere this exists, I don't have it. If you know where it's at, bring it home to me. Era 3 starts in 1980 when Bud left the music industry altogether for other ventures, including radar detectors, satellites, bass boats. There's all kinds of crazy stuff. Go watch the bio. It is this version, and it's signified immediately by a bracket around the word Ross. It also on the back plate does not say Chanute like the Era 2. And there's a company called IMC. This is out of Fort Worth, Texas. They essentially buy the company, bring some semis down, load up all the equipment, all the remaining inventory, and they relaunch the pedals. Here's an original sheet from this. You'll notice on this sheet that they actually photographed a lot of Era 2s because they bought the stock from Chanute, moved it in, and then you see the bracketed in new versions, including this chorus I'll get to later, some other things. A little bit later, they move from the Taiwan-made tan to a black aesthetic with color coding on the effects. You'll see them all later, but this was trying to catch up with things like the way MXR made a phaser orange and Boss pedals had a color to a sound. sound. For the distortion, there was a Harmony Marquee version sold in the Sears catalog as well, but these are all essentially Era 3s, and we would call this Era 3 version 1, Era 3 version 2. Before I jump to Era 4, I just want to say that it is unsure when this black Era 3 version 2 set quits being manufactured. I have to assume mid-late 80s. And then we see all kinds of things in the musical instrument pro audio world using the Ross or Ross Systems logo. This is a cable tester. There are microphones, mixer desks, speakers. I really don't know, and it's not really pertinent to this conversation. So with that said, in 2018, decades later after this, we have the launch of Ross Audibles by Cameron Ross. Cameron Ross is Bud's grandson, and one day while cleaning out the garage, he discovers his grandfather had this custom amps empire and a pedal company, and he wants to bring it back home and put it back in the family, and that's exactly what he did. These were made in Chicago. His friend assembled them, and this is all in 2018, and then the pandemic hits. I noticed that nothing was really happening with these at a certain point, and I was just so curious because during the launch of Ross Audibles, I interviewed Cameron for an interview that was going to be placed on my Patreon channel because I had begun studying this history. Now, what I learned to my shock is that Bud started custom amps, this huge, amazing empire, 15 miles from my house out of his garage in Spring Hill, Kansas. Crazy. So I became really interested, and the thought just kept coming to me. I wonder if I can help bring this Ross line back, bring it to Kansas City where the amps all started. Cameron and I began to talk about his difficulties. We stepped in together. Very few of these were made, by the way. They're just very few and far between. There's a couple models. But now we have the Era 5 made here by us in Kansas City, Ross Distortion. This Era 5 distortion takes the best of all the Ross eras before it and gives them to you. You have the very basic level, volume control, distortion. We moved to top-mounted jacks on all of these, soft touch switching, and we have a mode push button on the side. This pedal is the classic Ross, but it gives you two distinct versions. The very first and second eras use germanium clipping, so that's one of those switch positions, and then you move on to silicon clipping, which we actually use this exact yellow-black distortion unit to do that. So I'm going to do a jam where I start lower gain and then actually move into a higher gain setting. I'll be using the germanium mode. 2, 3. Let's jump to the Ross Phaser for the second demonstration. It starts in Era 1 Colorado, just like the distortion. We have a block R2 phaser. Before that was the script R2. But we also have this peculiar purple version which is a script R1 and kind of normal R1 here. So these are just stages of phasing. Think phase 45, phase 90. Then we see it move into era 2. The very first era 2, Chanute, said intensity here. So rate and intensity. And then they moved to the word recycle. If you're a collector again, you're going to want both of these. This is the era 2 kind of version 1, version 2 within that. And it's just aesthetic. Then we jump to the Taiwan made IMC pedals, the bracket. This was the hardest one to find, and I don't know why. There's some assumption that by the early 80s, phaser was out. I'm not really sure, but you have rate, recycle, and then kind of era 3 version 2, we jump into this black with the orange label. Within the era 3, they also made this for Harmony Marquee series. Same exact pedal, just different thing here. If you're a collector, go for that one. Then you don't see it in the audibles because they only did the distortion and the compressor. So this is it. For the mode position on this, we did something really fun. I love Univibe and its proximity to phaser. So you get the classic Ross phaser, but when you engage the button, it actually converts this into like a faux Univibe, which has a harder drop and slope. It's really wonderful. I'm gonna demonstrate that, and I'll engage the distortion for a section of the jam as well. I'll be using the distortion in the silicon mode. The gray Ross compressor is without a doubt one of the most famous compressors ever. During its time, it's kind of unknown if it was popular. I actually don't think it was, and a lot of people agree. But we see Trey from Fish start using it, and it just explodes in the internet age. And these with a box, if you find the Chanute era, they can go for upwards of $1,000. So it's really exciting to reintroduce this in a way that's affordable and accessible. But its story doesn't start in Colorado. It actually didn't exist in the beginning, and it comes into play in this second era from Chanute. The very first gray box Ross compressor appears on the scene in late 78, I believe, and it says output sustain. Then in Chanute, there is a change, and very few people ever notice this. Output gets changed to level, and it stays there. So the gray box sustain and output is very, very rare. Good luck finding that. Then we move to the era 3, which is made in Taiwan. Again, the brackets, Chanute's off the label. It says level, same exact circuit, even though people argue about it on the internet. There's also a black and green version from that era. Then it disappears with the brand Ross, but they bring it back in 2018 as the second of the Ross audibles. Our version has an added bright mode to it, which is incredibly useful for humbuckers, different situations, darker amps like a Marshall. Yeah, so I'm gonna jam 75% sustain. I'm gonna play the distortion in the silicon mode again with about 25% distortion. Hey Nick, I have some ephemera from the Chanute era.
Well, it's
and
so cool.
Also the Taiwan era. I want to test you.
Okay.
I'm gonna put them under the table.
Okay.
Here's a sticker.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
And then here's a sticker.
Okay.
I'll buy you a cup of coffee if you can tell me which one is the Chanute and which one is the Taiwan sticker. People don't respect this. This is as important as the pedals.
The right one is from Chanute.
You're right, or this one?
Yeah.
This is Chanute?
Yeah.
Final answer?
Final answer.
Call a friend?
No, I don't need to call a friend.
This is a Chanute. Good job. Everybody give him a hand. Overdub, a big applause.
Well, I'm gonna need like $100 for a cup of coffee.
Yeah. Good job. This pedal is really exciting to me. It never existed, but we're able to dig in to this custom amp lineage because one of my favorite bands ever, Creedence Clearwater Revival. Shout out to Rhett. Fist bump, Rhett. We both like Creedence. John Fogerty used these amps. Here's a photo of him on stage. I mean, he literally had the custom amps behind him at Woodstock. And inside of a couple of these amps are some distortion circuits. So we actually pulled these. They're a distortion and a fuzz kind of thing. We pulled it into this and we created a brand new product for this 5th era. Super, super fun and exciting. The color is a tribute back to that Colorado phaser. It's really straightforward. I need you to think of it as a distortion that can do fuzz, but it's hard to just say distortion because it's nothing like this. So a lot of you might really, really like this with the gain down and don't get hung up on that label. That's what it needed to be called, but know that it is actually really versatile. I'm gonna do a jam with it at about 75%. I'm gonna, we're gonna pay tribute to the great John Fogerty. John, if you're watching this, huge fan. I can't say enough about how much Creedence riffs helped me as a young guitar player to really fall in love and like the guitar. So let's jam on this. The switch on the side is a fat, thick mode. So when you engage it, it's a little more fuzzy with some more low end. The last pedal is the chorus. My favorite of the Ross pedals, I think. It's kind of an unknown legend. It's been sitting in the shadows. Now, the Ross chorus didn't even find its place into the line until the whole IMC Taiwan thing, and it first appears looking like this. Technically, it first appears looking like this, and this is a haunt. This is a collector's nightmare. Can we zoom in? Do you see this? Nick, what's the difference here?
It's got white print.
Yeah. You know what's weird?
Now it's time to watch Josh have a meltdown.
No one's ever seen this photographed pedal. This pedal's sitting somewhere in Dallas or Fort Worth in a drawer, in a garage, somebody's briefcase. There is a Whitewell Ross product. It's a white label, blue case, Era 3, version 1, chorus. Somebody out there has it. Bring it home to me. Back to the version 5. We're gonna jam on this. Also, there was the black version too. Same sound. We're gonna jam on this. This is exciting because classic chorus, or you engage and remove the dry signal, creating a pitch vibrato like a Boss VB2 or our artificial blonde or something at JHS. Depth and rate. It does an amazing rotary, which I'm gonna play on. I don't know. We're going to do a chromatic walk, which could be seen as the Beatles, Spoon. Who's that sad guy that plays acoustic? He's Irish. Damien Rice. It's a chromatic thing. And I'm going to engage the fuzz for a solo. So hold on to your britches. I'm really excited for this line, and I'm really honored that you take the time to watch this video and consider these. Relaunching this brand that's so historically important and tells such a wonderful story of a great creative in Bud Ross. It's exciting to me. I've often said on the show that companies don't make things, people do. And you've just seen this lineage of a line that we now get to bring back and build here in Kansas City at the JHS factory, but make it as a separate product and company along with Cameron, Bud's grandson. So it's amazing to get it back into the family, back into this geographical story of the Midwest, and bring you these brand new models. And again, if you're interested in hearing more of the story, and by more I mean all of the story, I have quite literally spent a couple years digging into family archives, interviewing people who worked at the factory who actually built these vintage pedals. Those links are in the description. There is the full-length documentary with a ton of amazing footage and assets and ephemera. And then also there's the online essay if you're a reader. It is the most in-depth, and you can take your time and really take in the whole story. Also, when you buy one of these new era Ross pedals, it comes with a little booklet. It was really important for us to make a small version of Bud's story and his legacy, put it in every product. So at a minimum, when and if you buy one of these, read that booklet and really appreciate this really cool story. With all that said, there's a lot more demos out there. They're in the description below. Please check them out. Thank you for watching this and considering. Let's jump to record time. Today's record time had to be Creedence Clearwater Revival's Chronicle for me. This is essentially 20 greatest hits, but for me, it goes right back to when I fell in love with the guitar. My family was an interesting musical situation. My parents didn't listen to much rock music, but my dad and mom appreciated and liked Creedence, so it was kind of fair game in the house with no arguments. This CD actually had the cassette first, which shows my age. I played the crap out of it. And as I was learning guitar, I remember one of my proudest moments. I went to the local guitar shop, and there was this guy there that was kind of a mentor in a sense of like helping me pick out gear and just getting started. And I had learned Green River, the riff. I didn't learn it right, but I had learned it, and I played it for him. And it was like this cool moment. It was like entering into the fold of guitar players that could actually play something off of an album. So Green River is such a cool song. Lodi, I actually have fond memories of putting it on repeat and like cleaning my room. Just like strange personal memories. Suzy Q solo, which is where you hear some of these tones. Also, Around the Bend is where you're going to hear that amp distortion fuzz. These are just good songs. They're amazing, simple, brilliant songwriting. John Fogerty has one of the best voices ever in rock music. There's also a Netflix documentary. Go check it out. You'll see a ton of custom amps, and it's awesome. So that's your record time.